My wife said she respect only people she loves, and I'm not one of them. So I changed the locks, canceled every privilege in my name, and called her father pickup was tonight. No one argued. Well, here's the thing about second chances. They're like buying a lottery ticket after you've already been screwed over by the first one. You know the odds are garbage, but hope makes you stupid, and stupid makes you optimistic. My name is Marcus Hale, and at 42, I thought I had this whole learning from mistakes thing figured out. Spoiler alert, I absolutely did not. 3 years ago, I met Isabella at one of those fancy charity events where rich people write checks to feel better about their existential dread. You know the type, overpriced champagne, silent auctions for trips to Tuscany that nobody actually wants to take, and enough fake smiles to power a small town. I was there because my company expected it. She was there because, well, I never really figured out why she was there. Maybe she smelled opportunity the way sharks smell blood in the water. Isabella was the kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room, she commanded it. Magnetic doesn't even begin to cover it. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person worth talking to, even when you could see other guys orbiting around her like planets around the sun. Her laugh was infectious. Her smile could melt steel, and when she looked at you with those dark eyes, it felt like she was seeing straight through to your soul. Of course, what I thought was deep connection was probably just her calculating my net worth. But hey, hindsight is 20/20 and love makes you blind as a bat. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Here I was, a divorced dad with more baggage than a cross-country flight. And this incredible woman was actually interested in me. Not just interested, she seemed genuinely excited about building something together. She talked about family dinners, weekend trips, maybe even kids of our own someday. It was like someone had handed me a script for the life I'd always wanted but never thought I'd get a second shot at. Now, let me be clear about my situation going into this romantic comedy turned horror movie. I had 2 kids from my first marriage, Clara, who's 11 and sharp as a tack, and Jonah, who's 9 and has enough energy to power a nuclear reactor. My ex-wife Sarah and I had managed to split without completely destroying each other or traumatizing the kids too badly, which in today's world basically makes us candidates for sainthood. The kids spent half their time with me, half with her, and I was doing my best to be the kind of dad who shows up to every soccer game and still remembers to pack lunches that don't consist entirely of Pop-Tarts and good intentions. Isabella came into this ready-made family situation like she was born for it. She didn't have kids of her own, but she had big dreams about what we could build together. She talked about being a stepmom like it was her calling, about creating traditions and memories, about giving Clara and Jonah the stable, loving home they deserved. She painted this picture of Sunday morning pancakes and family game nights and vacations to Disney World where nobody fights about money or whose turn it is to change a diaper. And me, I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Because when you've been through a divorce, especially one that left you questioning whether you're actually capable of making anyone happy, meeting someone who seems to believe in your potential feels like winning the emotional lottery. Isabella made me feel like I wasn't just some divorced dad trying to figure out how to microwave dinosaur chicken nuggets without setting off the smoke alarm. I was a man worth loving, worth building a life with. I gave her everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Financial stability? Check. I paid for her to go back to school and get her graduate degree in marketing, because she said she wanted to build something meaningful and contribute to our future. That little investment set me back about 40 grand, but I figured it was an investment in us, in our shared dreams, in the woman I was planning to spend the rest of my life with. The house? Yeah, I bought us a house. Not just any house. A 4-bedroom colonial in one of those neighborhoods where the homeowners association sends you passive-aggressive letters if your grass is half an inch too long. It had a big backyard for the kids, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and enough space for all of us to spread out and be comfortable. I put both our names on the deed because, hey, we were building a life together, right? And then there was her family. Oh, her family. The Morenos treated me like their personal ATM from day one. But I was so busy being in love and feeling grateful that someone like Isabella chose me that I didn't see the red flags until they were practically slapping me in the face. When her parents needed help with their mortgage after her dad's retirement didn't go as planned, guess who stepped up? When her sister Gabrielle needed someone to co-sign for her car loan because her credit was trashed, Guess who got voluntold to help out? Every family emergency, every financial crisis, every just this once request landed on my doorstep with a smile and a promise that they'd pay me back eventually, that I thought I was being a good husband, a good son-in-law, a good man. I thought effort and generosity and showing up every single day would build the kind of love that lasts. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, I could create the perfect family I'd always wanted. I thought love was something you could earn through sheer determination and an open wallet. But here's what nobody tells you about effort. It's only valuable when the other person recognizes it, appreciates it, and reciprocates it. When someone takes your effort for granted, when they start to see your sacrifices as their entitlements, when your generosity becomes an expectation rather than a gift, you're not building love. You're building resentment on both sides and setting yourself up for the kind of fall that leaves you wondering how you got so lost. Sometimes the people who don't want to see your effort are determined to stay blind to it, no matter how bright you try to shine. You know how they say the devil is in the details? Well, turns out the devil also lives in casual conversations over morning coffee and arguments about who forgot to pay the electric bill. The thing about marriage falling apart is that it doesn't happen all at once like in the movies. There's no dramatic music, no rain-soaked confrontation in a parking lot. Instead, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one so small you barely notice until you're bleeding out on your own kitchen floor. The cracks in our perfect little suburban dream started showing up about 6 months after we moved into the house. At first, they were hairline fractures, the kind of thing you could convince yourself was normal relationship stuff. Every couple has their issues, right? Every marriage goes through rough patches. I was a divorced guy, so I knew that relationships took work, that love wasn't always butterflies and rainbow unicorns farting glitter. But Isabella's issues weren't the normal, "You never put the toilet seat down," or "Why do you leave your socks on the bathroom floor?" complaints that most couples navigate. No, Isabella had a special talent for making comparisons that felt like psychological warfare disguised as casual conversation. She'd mention her ex-boyfriend Derek, who apparently was some kind of cross between Ryan Gosling and a motivational speaker. According to Isabella, Derek was passionate, the kind of guy who would surprise her with weekend trips to Napa Valley and write her poetry that didn't suck. Then there was Miguel, who was charming and could make her laugh until her sides hurt. Miguel apparently had this way of making every day feel like an adventure, even if they were just going grocery shopping or binge-watching Netflix on a Sunday afternoon. Isabella would get this dreamy look in her eyes when she talked about how Miguel could turn a mundane Tuesday into something magical just by being himself. And let's not forget about Jason, the ambitious one who was apparently destined to change the world one brilliant business idea at a time. Jason had vision, Jason had drive, Jason had the kind of magnetic personality that made everyone want to be around him. Jason also, coincidentally, never seemed to have any actual money, but Isabella glossed over that little detail whenever she brought up his many wonderful qualities to IT. First, I tried to be understanding about these trips down memory lane. Look, I'm not an idiot. I know that everyone has a past, and I didn't expect Isabella to pretend that I was her first relationship or that she'd never cared about anyone before me. Hell, I had my own history with Sarah, and there were things about my ex-wife that I still respected and appreciated. But there's a difference between acknowledging your past and using it as a weapon against your present. Every time Isabella brought up one of these paragons of masculine perfection, I felt a little smaller, a little less adequate, a little more like the consolation prize she'd settled for when the really good guys got away. I started second-guessing everything, the way I dressed, the way I talked, whether I was interesting enough or funny enough or spontaneous enough to keep her attention. I bought books on being more charismatic, started planning surprise date nights, even considered taking salsa dancing lessons because apparently Miguel was an amazing dancer that I told myself it was just insecurity talking, that Isabella didn't mean anything by these comparisons. Maybe she was just sharing her life with me, trying to help me understand who she was and how she'd gotten there. Maybe I was being too sensitive, reading malice into what was probably just nostalgia. After all, she'd chosen me, right? She'd said yes when I proposed. She'd moved into our house. She was building a life with me and the kids. Actions speak louder than words, and her actions said she wanted to be with me. But then came that night in November when everything shifted, when the paper cuts finally hit something vital, and I started hemorrhaging all over our brand new hardwood floors. We'd been arguing about money, specifically about how Isabella's credit card bills had somehow ballooned to the point where the minimum payments were eating up a significant chunk of our monthly budget. I wasn't trying to be controlling or unreasonable. I just wanted to understand how someone could spend $3,000 at Target in a single month. Like, what do you even buy at Target that costs $3,000? Did she purchase the entire houseware section? Was she stockpiling toilet paper for the apocalypse? Isabella got defensive, which I should have expected, but instead of just admitting that maybe she'd gone a little overboard with the retail therapy, she started attacking me for being cheap and controlling and obsessed with money. She accused me of trying to micromanage her life, of treating her like a child who couldn't be trusted with a credit card. She said I was sucking all the joy out of our relationship by constantly worrying about stupid things like budgets and financial responsibility. That I tried to stay calm, tried to explain that I wasn't trying to control her, that I was just concerned about our financial future, especially with 2 kids to think about. I reminded her that we had goals. We talked about maybe having a baby together someday, about taking family vacations, about saving for Clara and Jonah's college funds. All of that required some level of financial planning and restraint. That's when she looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, not hurt, just cold and matter-of-fact, like she was explaining something obvious to someone particularly dense. The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 20 degrees as she delivered the words that would replay in my head for months afterward. "I only respect people I love," she said, her voice steady and emotionless, "and you're not one of them." The silence that followed was deafening. Not the kind of silence that falls between people who are too angry to speak, but the kind that happens when someone has just dropped a nuclear bomb in the middle of your living room, and you're still trying to figure out if you're dead or alive. I stood there like an idiot, trying to process what she'd just said, trying to find some way to misinterpret or misunderstand words that were pretty damn unambiguous. She didn't say it in the heat of anger, didn't scream it or throw it at me like verbal shrapnel. She said it calmly, like she was commenting on the weather or telling me we were out of milk. I looked at this woman who was wearing the engagement ring I'd spent 2 months' salary on, who was standing in the house I'd bought for us, who'd eaten the dinner I'd cooked an hour earlier, and I realized I was staring at a complete stranger. Or maybe I was finally seeing her clearly for the first time. In that moment, everything clicked into place with horrible, crystal-clear precision. I wasn't her husband, I was her placeholder. I wasn't her partner, I was her convenience. All those comparisons to Derek and Miguel and Jason suddenly made perfect sense, because they were the men she'd actually loved, actually respected. I was just the guy who paid the bills. Ever notice how once someone shows you who they really are, you can't unsee it? It's like one of those optical illusion pictures where you're staring at what looks like a vase, and then someone points out the 2 faces looking at each other, and suddenly you can't see the vase anymore no matter how hard you try. That's what happened after Isabella's little truth bomb in our kitchen. Suddenly, I had X-ray vision for all the bullshit I'd been willfully ignoring for 3 years. The morning after our "I don't respect you" conversation, I woke up expecting some kind of acknowledgement from Isabella. Maybe an apology, maybe an attempt to walk back what she'd said. Hell, even just some awkwardness about having nuked our marriage from orbit the night before. Instead, she was sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened, sipping coffee from the mug I'd bought her that said, "World's Best Wife." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Morning," she said without looking up, like she hadn't just casually informed me that our entire relationship was built on a foundation of her complete and utter lack of respect for me as a human being. That's when I started really paying attention to the little things I'd been brushing off as quirks or personality differences. Like how Isabella had this charming habit of cutting me off mid-sentence whenever we were talking to other people, usually to correct something I'd said or add her own commentary that completely derailed whatever point I was trying to make. I'd always told myself she was just enthusiastic, just eager to contribute to the conversation. Turns out, what I'd interpreted as enthusiasm was actually her way of letting everyone know that my opinions weren't worth listening to. Take our dinner party the previous weekend with the Johnsons from down the street. I was telling them about this documentary I'd watched about sustainable farming, and Isabella literally held up her hand like a traffic cop and said, "Oh, Marcus is on one of his environmental kicks again. Did you guys see that new Netflix series about the serial killer in Wisconsin?" Just completely steamrolled right over me like I was some boring uncle at Thanksgiving that everyone tolerates but doesn't actually want to hear from. And the eye rolling. Jesus, the eye rolling. I started keeping a mental tally of how many times Isabella's eyes did a full 360 whenever I asked her for what I thought were perfectly reasonable things. "Could you pick up my dry cleaning since you're going to be near the strip mall anyway?" I roll. "Would you mind not leaving your coffee cups all over the house for me to collect like some kind of caffeinated Easter egg hunt?" I roll. "Do you think we could maybe discuss major purchases before you make them?" I roll so dramatic it probably registered on the Richter scale, but the real education and how little respect I commanded in my own house came from watching how the Moreno family treated me. Isabella's parents had never exactly rolled out the red carpet for me, but I chalked that up to normal protective parent stuff. Every father thinks no man is good enough for his precious daughter, right? Every mother-in-law has opinions about how her daughter could have done better. I figured they'd warm up to me eventually once they saw how much I loved Isabella and how well I provided for her. Richard Moreno, Isabella's father, was a retired judge who carried himself like he was still presiding over cases from his lazy-boy recliner. The man had perfected the art of looking at me like I was something he'd accidentally stepped in during his morning walk. Every conversation, we had felt like a cross-examination where I was both the defendant and already guilty of whatever crime he'd decided I'd committed. He had this way of asking questions that weren't really questions, more like statements designed to make me feel inadequate. "So Marcus, still working at that little consulting firm?" Little consulting firm. Like the company that employed 30 people and had been in business for 15 years was some kind of lemonade stand I was running out of my garage. "How's that house payment treating you?" "Pretty steep for someone in your situation." My situation being, apparently, not being wealthy enough to buy a house outright with cash like some kind of suburban drug lord. "Isabella tells me you've been doing the cooking lately." "That's modern of you." Modern. Like me making dinner for my own family was some kind of radical feminist experiment instead of just basic adult responsibility. And Gabrielle, Isabella's sister, was even worse because she wrapped her passive-aggressive bullshit in fake sweetness that made it harder to call out directly. Gabrielle had mastered the art of the backhanded compliment, the kind of comment that sounds almost nice until you really think about what she's saying. "Oh, Marcus, you're so good to Isabella. She's so lucky to have found someone who doesn't mind that she's out of his league." "Thanks, Gabrielle. Really appreciate you pointing out that I'm dating up while simultaneously making it sound like charity work. It must be nice for Isabella to not have to worry about money anymore. I mean, after all those years of dating guys who were too proud to take care of a woman properly." Translation: you're not too proud because you don't have anything to be proud of, but at least you're useful. You know, Marcus, some men would be intimidated by Isabella's education and success, but you seem really comfortable with it. Comfortable with it. Like I should be threatened by my wife's graduate degree that I paid for. For 3 years, I'd endured this death by 1,000 cuts, telling myself that family relationships take time to develop, that they'd eventually accept me, that I was being too sensitive or reading too much into innocent comments. But once Isabella confirmed that I wasn't someone she loved or respected, all those little slights and microaggressions suddenly looked different. They weren't the growing pains of blending families. They were the natural result of everyone involved recognizing that I was the weak link in the chain. The worst part wasn't even the disrespect itself. It was the realization that I'd been complicit in my own degradation. Every time Richard made some snide comment about my career, I'd laugh it off or try to prove him wrong instead of telling him to shove his opinions where the sun doesn't shine. Every time Gabrielle delivered one of her sugar-coated insults, I'd smile and nod like she was giving me a compliment instead of calling her out for being a manipulative bitch. Every time Isabella dismissed me in front of other people, I'd make excuses for her behavior instead of demanding the basic respect that every human being deserves. I'd been so desperate to make this family work, so grateful to be included in their little circle, that I'd allowed them to treat me like hired help instead of like the man who was keeping their precious Isabella housed, fed, educated, and financially secure. I'd mistaken tolerance for acceptance and submission for peace, but tolerance isn't acceptance, submission isn't peace, and being useful isn't the same thing as being valued. Once I understood that distinction, everything else started to make sense. You know what's funny about rock bottom? It's not actually the worst place to be. Rock bottom is solid ground, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to push off from to start swimming back to the surface. That Friday night, sitting in my home office while Isabella cackled at some TikTok video in the living room like she hadn't just blown up our marriage 48 hours earlier, I finally hit that solid ground. It was one of those November evenings where winter is knocking on the door but hasn't quite moved in yet. The kids were at Sarah's for the weekend, which meant the house had that weird quiet feeling it gets when there's no one around asking for snacks every 5 minutes or arguing about whose turn it is to walk the dog we don't even have. Just me, Isabella, and the sound of her completely ignoring my existence while I paid all the bills that made her comfortable lifestyle possible. I'd been going through our monthly expenses, which had become about as fun as getting a root canal without anesthesia. Isabella's spending had reached levels that would make a Kardashian blush. $3,000 at Target was apparently just the tip of the iceberg. There was also the $1,500 at Sephora because apparently she needed enough makeup to supply a small theater company. The $800 at Lululemon because regular yoga pants don't cost enough to make you feel superior to other people, and my personal favorite, the $1,200 she'd spent on something called wellness coaching, which, as far as I could tell, involved paying some woman with a fake British accent to tell her that her chakras were misaligned. But here's the thing about that Friday night. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and messy and makes you do stupid things like throw dishes or write passive-aggressive notes that you leave on the refrigerator. What I felt was something completely different. It was cold and clear and sharp as a surgical knife. It was the kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about what's really going on. I pulled out a yellow legal pad. Old school, I know, but there's something about writing things down by hand that makes them more real than typing them on a computer. At the top of the page, I wrote, monthly expenses, Marcus Hale pays for. Then I started making a list, and let me tell you, it was like watching a horror movie where you're screaming at the protagonist to not go into the basement, except I was both the protagonist and the person watching. The mortgage, $2,800 a month for a house that Isabella got to live in while contributing exactly $0 toward. Utilities, gas, electric, water, trash, internet, cable. Another $400 a month, so Isabella could keep the house at a tropical 75 degrees in winter while binge-watching reality shows about rich women throwing drinks at each other. Cell phones. Both lines, naturally, because God forbid Isabella should have to figure out how to pay for her own communication device. That was another $160 a month for the privilege of receiving text messages about how I was failing as a husband. Car insurance. Isabella's BMW wasn't going to insure itself, and apparently her driving record was about as stellar as her respect for me. Another $180 a month. Streaming services. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney+, HBO Max, Apple TV, and something called Peacock that I was pretty sure was just NBC, trying to make me pay for shows I could watch for free. Isabella had to have access to every piece of entertainment content ever created, which cost us about $60 a month. Her gym membership, $200 a month for a fancy place with eucalyptus towels and sparkling water on tap, because apparently breaking a sweat at Planet Fitness like a normal person would have been beneath her newly refined sensibilities. The credit cards. This was the big one. The financial equivalent of a tumor that kept growing no matter how much money I threw at it. Between the minimum payments on her various plastic fantastic adventures, I was looking at about $800 a month just to keep her from completely destroying our credit score. Her student loans. Remember that graduate degree I so generously financed? Well, it turns out that even though I paid for the tuition out of pocket, Isabella had still taken out loans for living expenses, which apparently meant maintaining her lifestyle while pretending to be a poor student. Another $300 a month. I sat there staring at this list, doing the math in my head, and realized that I was spending almost $5,000 a month just to subsidize the lifestyle of someone who had recently informed me that I wasn't worthy of her love or respect. $5,000. That's $60,000 a year. $60,000 annually to bankroll my own emotional abuse. But here's what really got me. It wasn't just the money. Money is just paper, just numbers on a screen, just a tool that you can earn more of if you're willing to work for it. What really twisted the knife was the realization that Isabella had never once, not even once, acknowledged that any of this was a gift. She didn't see my financial support as generosity or sacrifice or even basic partnership. She saw it as her due, her entitlement, her natural right as my wife to have me fund her existence while she treated me like something she'd scraped off her chute. I thought about all those conversations we'd had about money over the years, how she'd accused me of being controlling whenever I suggested that maybe we should have a budget, how she'd rolled her eyes when I tried to talk about saving for the future, how she'd made me feel like some kind of miser for wanting to understand where our money was going. She'd weaponized my own generosity against me, made me feel guilty for even questioning expenses that would have made a lottery winner nervous. And suddenly, sitting there in my office with that yellow legal pad and the sound of Isabella's laughter echoing from the living room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep, bone-level calm that comes when you finally understand what needs to be done. If Isabella didn't see me as someone worthy of love or respect, then why was I acting like someone obligated to provide for her every want and need? If I was just a paycheck to her, a convenient source of funding for her lifestyle, then what exactly was I getting out of this arrangement besides the privilege of being emotionally neglected by someone with expensive taste? For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't trying to figure out how to make Isabella happy, or how to earn her affection, or how to prove that I was worthy of her love. I was simply recognizing a basic economic principle. You don't continue to invest in something that gives you no return. That I would no longer finance my own disrespect. There's something almost therapeutic about burning bridges when you finally realize they only led to places you never wanted to go in the first place. That Saturday morning, while Isabella was still sleeping off whatever wine and Netflix combo had kept her up until 2 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, my laptop, and a sense of purpose that felt better than any antidepressant Big Pharma ever cooked up. That I'd made my decision. But now came the fun part, the execution. And let me tell you, there's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from methodically dismantling the financial safety net of someone who's spent years treating you like their personal ATM, while simultaneously letting you know that you're not good enough to deserve their basic human decency. First up, the cell phone. Isabella's iPhone was practically surgically attached to her hand, which made it the perfect place to start. I called Verizon and explained that I wanted to remove a line from our family plan. The customer service rep, bless her heart, tried to talk me out of it. "Are you sure, Mr. Hale? You'll lose the family plan discount, and it might actually cost you more to have just one line." "I'm absolutely positive," I told her, "and I need this to take effect immediately." "Well, we can do it right now, but the other phone will lose service within the hour." "Perfect. That's exactly what I'm going for." Next was the streaming services. Isabella had insisted we needed every possible platform because, according to her, missing out on the latest true crime documentary or reality show about housewives throwing wine at each other would basically be cultural suicide. I logged into Netflix first and changed the password to something Isabella would never guess: "Respect is earned 2024. Then I did the same with Hulu, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Apple TV, and that weird Peacock thing that I was pretty sure nobody actually watched. The banking was a little trickier, but not by much. I called our credit card company and explained that I needed to freeze the cards associated with Isabella's name. The representative asked if they were lost or stolen. "Not lost," I said, "but definitely not authorized for use anymore." "Sir, I need to clarify. Are these cards that you're an authorized user on, or are you the primary account holder?" "I'm the primary account holder on everything. My wife is the authorized user, and I'm removing her authorization." There was a pause. "Okay, Mr. Hale, I can certainly do that for you. The cards will be deactivated within the next few minutes. Would you like us to issue you a new card with a different number?" "That would be fantastic." The car insurance took all of 3 minutes. Isabella's BMW was insured under my policy, and all it took was a phone call to remove her from coverage. The insurance agent asked if she'd be getting her own policy. "That's between her and whatever insurance company she chooses to go with," I said. "My responsibility for her driving ends today." The gym membership was almost too easy. I logged into the account online and canceled her membership effective immediately. The system asked if I wanted to provide a reason for cancellation. I typed, no longer married to someone who respects the person paying for their membership, but then deleted it and just selected moving from the drop-down menu. No point in being petty when you're already being thorough. By noon, I had systematically removed Isabella from every financial benefit she'd enjoyed as my wife. Every privilege, every convenience, every little luxury that she'd taken for granted was gone faster than a Kardashian marriage. And the beautiful thing was, it was all completely legal and totally within my rights. Amazing how much power you have over your own money when you finally decide to use it. I made myself a sandwich, turkey and Swiss on sourdough, nothing fancy, and sat back down at the kitchen table to wait. Isabella usually didn't surface until around 1 on weekends, which meant I had about an hour to mentally prepare for what was about to be either the most satisfying conversation of my marriage or the most nuclear argument we'd ever had. Possibly both. At exactly 1:15 p.m., I heard the shower turn on upstairs. Isabella's weekend routine was as predictable as clockwork. Wake up, spend 20 minutes scrolling through social media in bed, shower, spend another 20 minutes on her skincare routine that involved more products than a small pharmacy, then come downstairs expecting me to have coffee ready and probably some kind of elaborate brunch prepared. At 1:47 p.m., I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the kitchen wearing one of those athleisure outfits that cost more than most people's car payments. Her hair perfectly styled despite having just gotten out of the shower, looking like she was ready for a photo shoot for Women Who Marry Well magazine. "Morning, babe," she said, heading straight for the coffee maker without looking at me. "What's the plan for today?" "I was thinking we could go to that new brunch place downtown, maybe do some shopping after. Anthropologie is having a sale, and I saw this dress that would be perfect for the Morrisons' party next weekend." She grabbed her phone from the counter, and immediately her face scrunched up in confusion. "Weird, I'm not getting any signal. Is the Wi-Fi down or something?" "The Wi-Fi's fine," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Your phone line has been disconnected." She looked at me like I'd just told her that gravity had been canceled. "What do you mean disconnected?" "I mean I called Verizon this morning and removed your line from our plan. Your phone no longer has service." Isabella stared at me for a long moment, then let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Very funny, Marcus. What's really going on?" "That is what's really going on. I also changed the passwords on all the streaming services, froze your credit cards, canceled your car insurance, and terminated your gym membership. Effective immediately." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." I stood up and walked over to where she was standing, close enough that she could see I wasn't joking, wasn't angry, wasn't having some kind of breakdown. I was just done. "You told me 2 nights ago that you only respect people you love, and that I'm not one of them. So I spent some time thinking about what that means, and I realized you're absolutely right. If I'm not someone you love or respect, then I'm also not someone who's obligated to finance your lifestyle." "Marcus, you're being ridiculous. You can't just..." "I can, and I did. Respect isn't free, Isabella. You want to be married to someone who pays for your phone, your credit cards, your insurance, your entertainment, your gym membership, and everything else? Then you need to be married to someone you actually respect. Since that's not me, according to you, then I'm not your provider anymore." She opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time in 3 years, absolutely nothing came out. And in that moment of stunned silence, I realized something beautiful. I was finally free. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of November day where the sky looks like it's been scrubbed clean and the air has that crisp bite that makes you feel more awake than any amount of caffeine ever could. I woke up before my alarm, which was unusual, but then again, everything about the last 48 hours had been unusual. Isabella had spent most of Saturday alternating between furious silence and tearful attempts to convince me that I was having some kind of midlife crisis breakdown, but I'd held firm. No negotiation, no discussion, no, let's work this out over couples therapy bullshit. The financial support was over, period, end of sentence, but cutting off the money was just the first step. Phase 2 was about to begin, and it required Isabella to be out of the house for a few hours. Fortunately, she'd made plans to go shopping with Gabrielle, probably to complain about what an unreasonable monster I'd turned into overnight, and to figure out how to guilt me back into funding her lifestyle. What she didn't know was that while she was gone, I was going to make sure that when she came back, She wouldn't be able to get back in at 9 a.m. sharp. A locksmith van pulled into my driveway. I'd called Rodriguez and Son Saturday night and paid extra for Sunday service, which told you something about how serious I was about this whole operation. Miguel Rodriguez was a stocky guy in his 50s who'd probably seen every kind of domestic drama you could imagine, and he had the kind of weathered face that said he didn't ask questions he didn't need answers to. "You want all the locks changed?" he asked, looking at the front door, the back door, and the side entrance that led into the garage. "Everything, and I need it done fast. My wife should be gone for about 3 hours, and I want this finished before she gets back." Miguel nodded like he'd heard this story 1,000 times before. "Dead bolts too. Dead bolts, doorknobs, everything. And I need 3 sets of keys. One for me, one for my daughter, and one for my son." "What about your wife?" "She won't be needing keys." Miguel's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight raise of his eyebrow. "All right then. This'll take me about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours tops. You want the good stuff or the cheap stuff?" "The good stuff. Money's no object for this particular project." While Miguel worked on transforming my house into Fort Knox, I tackled the next item on my agenda: packing Isabella's belongings. Now, I want to be clear here. I wasn't throwing her stuff in garbage bags and dumping it on the lawn like some kind of redneck Jerry Springer episode. I'm not a savage. I went to Target, bought a bunch of those clear plastic storage containers, and methodically packed everything that belonged to her with the same care I'd shown her for 3 years. The care she'd never appreciated or acknowledged, but care nonetheless. Her clothes filled 8 containers. 8. I'm talking about enough outfits to supply a small boutique, including shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent and handbags that probably had their own insurance policies. Her makeup and skincare products filled 2 more containers, and I swear some of those little jars cost more per ounce than gold. Her books, her knickknacks, her collection of candles that all smelled like vanilla bourbon or autumn leaves or whatever scent was supposed to make you feel sophisticated. Everything went into containers, labeled with a black Sharpie in my neatest handwriting. The jewelry was trickier. Obviously, her engagement ring and wedding band were hers to keep, along with all the other jewelry she'd accumulated over the years. But there were a few pieces I'd given her for birthdays and anniversaries that had more sentimental value than monetary value, and I found myself hesitating over those. Then I remembered her words from Thursday night. "I only respect people I love, and you're not one of them." And into the container they went. If I wasn't someone she respected, then gifts from me probably didn't mean much to her anyway. Miguel finished with the locks. At 11:30, tested each one twice, and handed me 3 sets of shiny new keys. "You want me to stick around?" he asked. "Sometimes these situations get complicated." "No, but I appreciate the offer. I think I can handle it from here." "All right then. Good luck, man." After he left, I arranged Isabella's containers in neat rows on the front porch, covered them with a tarp in case it rained, and then went inside to wait. The house felt different somehow, lighter, like someone had opened all the windows and let out 3 years' worth of stale air. I made myself a sandwich, opened a beer even though it wasn't even noon yet, and sat down in my living room to think about what I was going to say when Isabella came home at 2:15 p.m. My phone rang. Isabella's name popped up on the screen, which was ironic considering her phone didn't actually have service anymore. She must have been using Gabrielle's phone or maybe the Wi-Fi at whatever coffee shop they'd landed in to lick their wounds and plot their counterattack. "Marcus," she said, and I could hear the barely controlled panic in her voice. "I can't get in the house." "That's correct." There was a pause, like she was trying to process the fact that I'd actually followed through on something for once instead of just threatening and then backing down like I usually did. "What do you mean?" "That's correct. I mean exactly what I said yesterday. You told me you don't love or respect me, which means I'm not your provider anymore. And if I'm not your provider, then this isn't your house. Marcus, this is insane. You can't lock me out of my own home. Actually, it's not your home. Your name might be on the deed, but you've never paid a dime toward the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, or any other expense associated with this property. Legally and practically, this is my house that I was generously allowing you to live in. That generosity has now expired." I could hear Gabrielle in the background, probably coaching Isabella on what to say, or maybe calling her own husband to complain about what an unreasonable bastard I was being. "Where am I supposed to go?" Isabella asked, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely scared. I honestly don't know, and frankly, it's not my problem to solve anymore. But I will say this. Your belongings are packed neatly on the front porch, covered with a tarp so they won't get wet. I suggest you arrange to have them picked up soon. This is extreme, Marcus. Marriage is supposed to be about working through problems together. You're absolutely right. Marriage is supposed to be about mutual love, respect, and partnership. But you made it very clear that you don't love or respect me, which means we don't actually have a marriage. We have a financial arrangement that I've decided to terminate. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. So that's it. You're just giving up on us. No, Isabella. You gave up on us a long time ago. I'm just finally accepting reality. If you've never had the pleasure of watching entitled people realize that their free ride is over, let me paint you a picture. It's like watching someone try to use an expired credit card at a luxury store. There's denial, then anger, then bargaining, then more anger, and finally a kind of stunned disbelief that the world doesn't actually revolve around them. I got a front row seat to this psychological circus at exactly 6:30 that evening when Richard Moreno's silver Lexus pulled into my driveway like he was arriving to foreclose on a mortgage. I'd been expecting this, of course. There was no way Isabella was going to handle this situation with any kind of dignity or self-reflection. No, she was going to run straight to Daddy and let him fight her battles for her, because that's what entitled people do when reality comes knocking. They call in the cavalry and hope that someone with more authority can bully the world back into the shape they prefer. Richard climbed out of his car wearing what I like to call his judge face, that stern, disapproving expression he'd perfected over 30 years on the bench, the one that was supposed to make you feel like you were guilty of something even if you'd never so much as jaywalked. Gabrielle emerged from the passenger side, looking like she was heading to a funeral, all black clothes and dramatic sunglasses, even though the sun was already setting. And Isabella, well, Isabella looked like someone who'd spent the day crying in coffee shops and getting her ego stroked by people telling her what a victim she was. I watched this little parade of dysfunction march up my front walk from my living room window, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and total calm. No anxiety about confrontation, no desperate need to explain myself or justify my actions, no urge to apologize for finally standing up for myself. Just a deep, settled peace that comes from knowing you're absolutely, 100% in the right. The doorbell rang. I let it ring again. Then I heard Richard's voice through the door, using his courtroom tone like he was calling court to session. Marcus, open this door. We need to talk. I took my time walking to the front door, stopping to check my hair in the hallway mirror and straighten my shirt. When I opened the door, I was met with 3 faces that looked like they'd been expecting me to grovel and beg forgiveness. Instead, they got a man who looked like he'd just had the best night's sleep of his life. Richard, Gabrielle, Isabella. I nodded to each of them like I was greeting casual acquaintances. What can I do for you? Richard's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. What can you do for us? Marcus, this is absolutely unacceptable behavior. You cannot lock your wife out of her own home. Actually, I can and I did. And it's not her home. It's my home that I was allowing her to live in rent-free until she made it clear that she doesn't respect the person paying for her lifestyle. That's not how marriage works. Gabrielle jumped in, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. You don't just get to kick someone out because you had a fight. I looked at Gabrielle with the kind of patience you usually reserve for explaining basic math to a particularly slow kindergartner. We didn't have a fight, Gabrielle. Isabella made a very clear statement about her feelings regarding our relationship. I'm simply responding appropriately to that information. Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a whine than actual words. Marcus, please. You're being ridiculous. You can't expect me to take everything I said completely literally. Oh, but I can, I said, leaning against my doorframe with my arms crossed. See, when someone tells you they only respect people they love and that you're not one of them, that's what we call a definitive statement. It's not ambiguous. It's not open to interpretation. It's a clear declaration of how you view our relationship. Richard puffed himself up like an angry peacock. Marriage requires patience, Marcus. You work through problems, You don't abandon ship at the first sign of trouble. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The chance to explain basic human dignity to a man who'd spent his career supposedly upholding justice, but apparently never learned the difference between respect and tolerance. Patience, I said, looking Richard dead in the eye, is built on a foundation of mutual respect. Without respect, there's nothing to be patient about. There's just one person accepting poor treatment from another person who feels entitled to give it. But she's your wife. Gabrielle protested, like that title was some kind of magic spell that made abuse acceptable. Being someone's wife doesn't give you the right to treat them like garbage, I replied. And being someone's husband doesn't obligate you to fund your own disrespect indefinitely. Isabella stepped forward, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize, might show some recognition of how her words and actions had brought us to this point. Instead, she went straight to emotional manipulation. You're abandoning me, Marcus. How can you just throw away 3 years like they meant nothing? The audacity was breathtaking. Here was a woman who'd just spent 3 years treating me like an ATM with legs, who'd explicitly told me she didn't love or respect me, who'd compared me unfavorably to every man she'd ever dated, now trying to make me feel guilty for refusing to continue subsidizing my own emotional abuse. I'm not throwing away anything, Isabella, I said, my voice steady and calm. You threw away our marriage the moment you decided I wasn't worth your respect. I'm simply acknowledging what you already made clear. We don't have a relationship based on love and mutual respect. We have a financial arrangement that I've chosen to terminate. This is cruel and unusual punishment. Richard bellowed, apparently forgetting that he was no longer in a courtroom and that marital disputes don't fall under the Eighth Amendment. No, I said, finally letting some steel creep into my voice. Cruel and unusual punishment is spending 3 years being told you're not good enough by someone whose entire lifestyle you're funding. Cruel and unusual punishment is having your contributions ignored, your efforts dismissed, and your worth measured solely by your ability to pay other people's bills. What I'm doing is called self-respect, and it's long overdue. Isabella's composure finally cracked completely. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I gestured toward the neat rows of storage containers on my front porch, covered with the tarp to keep them dry. Your belongings are right there, packed carefully and ready for transport. As for where you go and what you do, that's entirely up to you. You're an adult with a graduate degree that I paid for. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You can't be serious about this, Richard said, but his bluster was starting to deflate as he realized that his intimidation tactics weren't working on someone who'd finally stopped caring about his approval. I'm completely serious. More serious than I've been about anything in years. I straightened up and prepared to deliver the closing argument. Isabella made a choice when she told me I'm not someone she loves or respects. I'm simply honoring that choice by removing myself from the position of supporting someone who views me with contempt. The silence that followed was beautiful. You know what's funny about small suburban neighborhoods? Information travels faster than gossip at a church potluck, and everyone suddenly becomes a marriage counselor with strong opinions about situations they know absolutely nothing about. By Monday morning, the news that Marcus Hale had locked his wife out of their house was making the rounds faster than a stomach bug at a daycare center. I discovered this delightful fact when I stepped outside to grab my newspaper. Yes, I still get the actual paper because I'm apparently ancient, and found my neighbor Janet Peterson practically lurking behind her mailbox like some kind of suburban spy. Janet was the self-appointed mayor of our little cul-de-sac, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business and felt personally responsible for maintaining what she called neighborhood standards, which was basically code for making sure nobody did anything that might lower property values or offend her delicate sensibilities. "Morning, Marcus," she called out, with that fake casual tone people use when they're fishing for information. "Everything okay? I saw Richard's car here yesterday evening, and there seemed to be some discussion happening on your front porch." Discussion. That was a polite way of describing what had essentially been a 3-person intervention designed to shame me back into financing Isabella's lifestyle, while she treated me like something she'd scraped off her designer shoes. "Everything's fine, Janet. Just working through some domestic issues." "Oh." She looked disappointed that I wasn't going to spill all the juicy details right there on the sidewalk at 7 in the morning. "Well, if you need anything. I mean, marriage can be so challenging these days." Translation: I'm dying to know what happened, and I'm going to spend the rest of the day calling every woman in the neighborhood to speculate about your personal life. That be why the time I got to work, my phone had already started buzzing with calls and texts from people who'd apparently heard various versions of the story. My buddy Dave from college sent a text that said simply, "Dude, did you really change the locks?" My sister called to ask if I was having a nervous breakdown. Even my ex-wife Sarah texted to ask if the kids should be concerned about their living situation when they were with me. The really interesting calls, though, came from people I hadn't heard from in months. Suddenly, everyone wanted to have lunch, grab a beer, or catch up, in ways that were obviously just excuses to get the real story straight from the source. It was like being a celebrity, except instead of being famous for something cool like making movies or hitting home runs, I was famous for finally growing a backbone at age 42. The reactions fell into predictable categories. There were the people who thought I was completely justified, usually other divorced guys who'd been through their own version of this particular hell. These were the men who'd had their contributions dismissed, their efforts ignored, their self-respect slowly eroded until they finally said enough was enough. They didn't need the details. They just needed to know that someone else had finally drawn a line in the sand and refused to let it be crossed. Then there were the people who thought I was being too harsh, too extreme, too unwilling to work on the relationship. These were mostly married women who'd apparently never been told by their spouse that they weren't worthy of love or respect, or men who'd been so thoroughly beaten down by their own relationships that they couldn't imagine standing up for themselves. They talked about compromise and communication and giving people second chances, as if I hadn't spent 3 years doing exactly that while Isabella systematically destroyed whatever respect I'd once had for myself. The most interesting reactions came from people who'd actually spent time around Isabella and me as a couple. These were the friends who'd watched her dismiss my opinions at dinner parties, who'd seen her roll her eyes when I spoke, who'd witnessed the way she treated me like hired help rather than a partner. They didn't need explanations because they'd been watching the slow-motion car wreck of our marriage from the beginning. That my friend Tom, whose wife Karen was part of Isabella's little social circle, called me Tuesday afternoon with what he described as intelligence from behind enemy lines. Karen came home from coffee with the girls yesterday, and apparently Isabella is painting herself as the victim of some kind of abusive husband who went crazy and kicked her out without warning, he said. But here's the thing. Karen has eyes, and she's been watching how Isabella treats you for 3 years. She told me that if some woman talked to her the way Isabella talks to you, she'd have divorced him before the appetizers arrived. This was validation I hadn't realized I needed. For so long, I'd wondered if I was being too sensitive, if I was misinterpreting Isabella's behavior, if maybe the problem really was me and my inability to make her happy. Hearing that other people had noticed the disrespect, had been uncomfortable watching it, made me realize that I hadn't been imagining things. But the most important reactions came from the two people whose opinions actually mattered, Clara and Jonah. The kids came to stay with me Wednesday evening, and I could tell immediately that they'd heard something. 11-year-old Clara has always been perceptive beyond her years, and 9-year-old Jonah picks up on emotional undercurrents like a bloodhound picks up scents. "Dad," Clara said while we were making dinner together, "Mom said Isabella moved out." "That's right, sweetheart. Isabella and I are having some problems, and we decided it would be better if she stayed somewhere else for a while. Are you getting divorced?" Jonah asked, looking up from his homework at the kitchen table. I paused, realizing this was one of those parenting moments where honesty was more important than protecting them from uncomfortable truths. "I don't know yet, buddy. We need to figure some things out first." What surprised me was their reaction. I'd expected questions, maybe some sadness about the disruption to their routine, possibly some concern about how this would affect their living situation. Instead, Clara nodded like this made perfect sense, and Jonah just went back to his math homework. Later that evening, while we were watching a movie, Clara curled up next to me on the couch and said something that nearly broke my heart. "Dad, you seem happier now." Out of the mouths of babes. My 11-year-old daughter had noticed something that apparently half the adults in my life had missed. That living with someone who doesn't respect you is like carrying a weight you don't even realize is there until it's gone. "I am happier, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have to make difficult choices to take care of themselves. Like when you told me I didn't have to be friends with Megan anymore after she was mean to me. Exactly like that. For the first time in months, maybe years, my kids saw their father as someone who wouldn't tolerate being treated poorly, someone who valued himself enough to walk away from a situation that was making him miserable. They saw strength instead of resignation, boundaries instead of endless accommodation, and that, more than anything else, told me I'd made the right choice. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the universe to start delivering some poetic justice with a side of humble pie. 3 weeks of Isabella discovering what life looked like when you actually had to pay for your own phone bill, your own car insurance, your own overpriced lattes and wellness coaching sessions. 3 weeks of reality crashing into privilege like a freight train hitting a BMW. I heard about Isabella's new circumstances through the neighborhood gossip network, which was more efficient than the CIA when it came to gathering intelligence. Janet Peterson had apparently made it her personal mission to track Isabella's post-lockout life, like some kind of suburban war correspondent. According to Janet's sources, and let's be honest, Janet had sources everywhere, Isabella had moved in with Gabrielle temporarily, which was already causing tension because Gabrielle's husband wasn't thrilled about having his sister-in-law's drama disrupting his peaceful home life. But the real entertainment came when Isabella tried to maintain her previous lifestyle without my financial support. Apparently, she'd gone to Target expecting to drop her usual $1,000 on whatever caught her fancy, only to discover that her credit cards weren't just frozen, they were canceled. The cashier had to cut up her Visa right there at the register while a line of soccer moms watched the show. Janet described it as quite the spectacle, which in Janet's world was basically the equivalent of calling it a Category 5 disaster. Isabella had also tried to go to eucalyptus towels, only to be informed that her membership had been terminated and she'd need to pay the full initiation fee, plus monthly dues if she wanted to rejoin. Apparently, she'd made quite a scene about that too, demanding to speak to the manager and threatening to sue for discrimination. The manager, according to Janet's intelligence network, had politely explained that not paying your bills wasn't a protected class under civil rights law. The cell phone situation was particularly problematic because Isabella had apparently never bothered to learn my social security number or any of the account information needed to set up her own service. She'd been using Gabrielle's phone for everything, which was causing its own set of issues since Gabrielle's husband was getting tired of his wife's phone being tied up with Isabella's social life and job search drama. Yeah, job search. Turns out when you don't have someone else paying for your every need, you actually have to work for a living. Who could have predicted that shocking development? But the real wake-up call came when Isabella tried to find her own apartment. See, having your name on a deed doesn't mean much when you've never actually paid any of the associated expenses. Isabella had no credit history in her own name, no proof of income, no rental references, and no savings account because she'd spent every penny I'd ever given her on maintaining her lifestyle. Landlords, it turns out, want tenants who can actually pay rent, not tenants who can explain at length why their estranged husband should pay their rent. I learned all of this not because I was stalking Isabella's misfortunes, but because people kept calling to update me like I was following some kind of reality TV show. My buddy Tom was particularly good at gathering intelligence through Karen, who was still part of Isabella's social circle and therefore had front-row seats to the ongoing disaster. She tried to get a job at that marketing firm downtown, Tom reported during one of our weekly phone calls. Apparently, the interview didn't go well when they asked about her work experience, and she had to explain that she'd been focusing on her marriage for the past 3 years. Focusing on her marriage. That was a creative way to describe spending my money while treating me like I was beneath her notice. Yeah, and when they asked for references, she put down your name. They called you yesterday, didn't you get the message? I had gotten the message, actually. A very professional woman from Henderson Marketing had called to verify Isabella's employment history and character references. I'd been polite but honest. Isabella had never worked during our marriage. I'd financially supported her graduate education, and while she was intelligent and capable, I couldn't speak to her work ethic or professional reliability since I'd never observed either in a work context. I'd wished the company luck with their decision and hung up. Isabella didn't get the job, but the most interesting development came on a Thursday evening when my phone rang and Richard Moreno's name appeared on the screen. Not Isabella calling from someone else's phone, not Gabrielle trying to mediate, Richard himself, calling me directly for the first time in 3 years. Marcus. His voice was different, less commanding, more tired. Richard, what can I do for you? There was a long pause, the kind of silence that happens when someone is swallowing their pride and finding it tastes worse than they expected. I wanted to talk to you about Isabella. Okay, she's struggling, Marcus. This whole situation has been very difficult for her. I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for him by jumping in with reassurances or apologies. If Richard wanted to have this conversation, he was going to have to actually have it. She's living with Gabrielle, but that's not working out well. She can't find a job, can't get approved for an apartment, can't even get a decent cell phone plan because she has no credit history. That sounds challenging, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Marcus, I think I owe you an apology. Now that was unexpected. Richard Moreno apologizing to anyone was like finding a unicorn in your backyard. Theoretically possible, but not something you'd ever actually expect to witness. For what? For not understanding what you were dealing with. For treating you like you weren't good enough for our family when you were the one holding everything together. The silence stretched out between us, filled with 3 years of condescension, dismissal, and casual disrespect that we were both remembering. Isabella called me crying yesterday, he continued. She said she never realized how much you did for her until it was gone. She said she thought you'd always be there, that you'd always take care of everything, no matter how she treated you. And what did you tell her? I told her that respect should never be realized in hindsight, that it should be practiced daily, in the moment, when it matters. For the first time in our entire relationship, Richard Moreno wasn't arguing with me. He wasn't trying to prove I was wrong, wasn't defending Isabella's behavior, wasn't making excuses for his family's treatment of me. He was actually agreeing with me. She wants to talk to you, Marcus. She wants to try to work things out. I know. She's been calling. Are you going to talk to her? I looked around my house, my peaceful, drama-free house where I could eat dinner without being ignored, watch TV without being dismissed, and go to bed without wondering what I'd done wrong that day. Maybe, but not because she's struggling, and not because she finally realizes what she lost. If I talk to Isabella, it'll be because she's learned something about respect that goes deeper than just missing her lifestyle. Richard was quiet for a long moment. That's fair, Marcus. That's more than fair. When we hung up, I realized something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the problem that needed to be solved. I wasn't the one who needed to change, compromise, or try harder. I was finally the one whose boundaries were being respected. For months, that's how long it took Isabella to figure out that pride doesn't pay rent and entitlement doesn't cover car insurance. For months of living in the real world where your charm doesn't get you a discount at the grocery store and your magnetic personality doesn't convince landlords to waive security deposits. 4 months of discovering that when you've spent 3 years treating your husband like an ATM with legs, you might actually have to face some consequences for that choice. The call came on a rainy Tuesday in March. Not a dramatic storm or anything cinematic, just one of those steady drizzles that makes everything look gray and makes you want to stay inside with a good book and a cup of coffee. I was doing exactly that when my phone buzzed with Isabella's name. Her actual name this time, not Gabrielle's phone or Dad's phone, like the previous dozen times she'd tried to reach me. Marcus? It's Isabella. I know. Your name came up on my phone. A pause. In the old days, that would have been her cue to launch into some speech about how I was being cold or unreasonable. Instead, she just took a breath and kept going. I was wondering, could we meet somewhere? Just to talk. About what? About us. About what I did. About what I said. Her voice was different, smaller, less certain, like someone who'd been knocked down a few pegs and was still figuring out how to navigate from a lower altitude. I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like a chance to explain. I looked out my window at the rain, at my peaceful neighborhood where I could now walk around without wondering if the neighbors were judging me for not being good enough for the woman who lived in my house. I thought about Clara and Jonah, who'd been sleeping better at my place, laughing more, acting like kids instead of walking on eggshells around an adult who might roll her eyes at them for existing too loudly. Okay, coffee shop on Maple Street, Saturday at 10 a.m. 1 hour. Thank you, Marcus. Really, thank you. Saturday morning came with one of those perfect spring days that makes you believe in new beginnings and second chances. I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early, Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be settled and centered before whatever conversation we were about to have. I ordered my usual black coffee, found a corner table, and watched Isabella pull into the parking lot in a Honda Civic that had definitely seen better days. She walked in looking like a completely different person from the woman who'd left my house 4 months ago. Gone were the designer clothes and the perfect hair and the general air of someone who expected the world to arrange itself around her comfort. This Isabella looked tired, a little worn around the edges, like someone who'd been learning some hard lessons about how the world actually worked. "Hi," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thanks for agreeing to meet. You said you wanted to explain. So explain." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it. And for a moment, she looked younger, more vulnerable than I'd seen her since those early days when I thought we were building something real together. "I was cruel to you, Marcus. Not just the night I said I didn't respect you, but for months before that. Years, really." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Actual remorse. Not the performative kind designed to get her way, but the real thing that comes from understanding the weight of your own actions. "I took everything you did for granted. I treated your generosity like it was my right instead of your choice." "Yes, you did. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought love meant never having to worry about money or bills or any of the practical stuff because someone else would always take care of it. I thought respect was something you earned once and then just had forever. And now I know that respect is something you give every day in 1,000 small ways, or you lose it. I know that when someone takes care of you, it's not because they have to, it's because they choose to. And when you make someone feel like their choice doesn't matter, like they're just a provider instead of a partner, they stop choosing you." I sipped my coffee and studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, the little tells that would indicate this was just another performance designed to get her life back to the comfortable level she preferred. But what I saw was something different. A woman who'd been broken down by reality and was trying to figure out how to build herself back up into someone worth respecting. "Isabella, I appreciate you saying all of this. I really do. But apologies don't undo 3 years of being treated like I wasn't good enough for you, while simultaneously being expected to fund your lifestyle. I know they don't." She leaned forward, her eyes serious. "I'm not asking you to take me back, Marcus. I'm not even asking for another chance, not yet. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you, to us. I wanted you to know that you were right to draw that line, to refuse to accept being treated that way. That was unexpected. I'd been prepared for tears, for promises to change, for elaborate schemes to win me back.